Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamaru, Managing Director of Elpid Global. Our mission is to connect the supply chain ecosystem in Asia and globally by bringing forward the most interesting leaders in the industry. And I'm very happy to have with us today Dan Bartel, who is the Chief Procurement Officer of Schneider Electric. As you may know, Schneider Electric is a global leader in the energy management field, providing software, hardware, and services solutions with a combined revenue of close to 26 billion euros last year. Dan joined Schneider Electric in the beginning of 2019 and is based in Hong Kong. In his current role, he is leading the 13 billion euro procurement spend that cuts across 200 plus manufacturing factories and 100 plus distribution centers in 44 countries. He leads the establishment of processes, tools, systems, and organizational competencies to manage change towards a supply base as an extension of the company enterprise. Prior to joining Schneider Electric, he served several roles in procurement and logistics at ABB, ultimately serving as the group's SVP and head of procurement and logistics based in Zurich, Switzerland. He has 24 years of global experience in procurement and supply chain management, primarily in the energy and automation industries. Dan, pleasure to have you with us today, and thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Radu. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I'll start with a question from one of our listeners who has obviously been following you for a while, because he read an article that you wrote or you contributed to 3 years back, in which you were talking about Industrial Revolution 4.0, and you were asking at that time a couple of questions linked to what the effects of this fourth Industrial Revolution will be on procurement, and also what can leaders of the procurement function do to lead the change. So this was 3 years ago. What has happened in this span of the last 3 years, and how have things changed?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting to reflect on that. The first thing that comes to mind is Amara's law, right, which says that we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. And I think that applies to some of the points I made in that article. But while other points I think have actually accelerated even beyond what I anticipated 3 years ago. One thing I talked about there was customer expectations and the fact that they're shifting. What I've seen in the last few years is a dramatic shift, say, in expectations with respect to response time, with respect to agility. I think in today's day and age, forecasting is actually futile. And agility and speed really are the key to succeeding with respect to meeting customer expectations. We've seen one of the most dramatic cycles in the semiconductor industry in the last few years, for example. The most dramatic I've seen in my career anyway, which I think few people were predicting the level and the degree to which that cycle came up on us. And now we're seeing kind of the backlash of that as well in terms of excess inventories and stocks piling up. So being able to anticipate customer expectations, I think, is becoming more and more challenging, and being able to react quickly to shifting expectations is becoming more and more a key differentiator. I think I also talked in that article about how products are being more and more enhanced by data. What I've seen is, when I look at what Schneider is taking to the market today, a vast majority of what we're selling are connected products, which is not the case just a few years ago. EcoStruxure is Schneider's IoT-enabled architecture and platform that we put in homes, buildings, data centers, infrastructure. It's got innovation at every level, connected products, connected to the edge, on site with apps, analytics, and services layered across the top. And we're truly selling now, a value-based solution rather than individual one-off products. So that's been a big shift. I also talked about partnerships, how new partnerships are being formed as companies learn the importance of new forms of collaboration. And I would say that collaborative innovation has become more and more the norm in many industries. And procurement more and more is playing a leading role in defining the relationships with suppliers in these collaborations, managing those commercial relationships with those partners. And I'd say in Schneider, we're doing this not only with mature companies, but also with a lot of startup companies that are bringing new innovations into the marketplace. The last thing I talked about in that article was operating models and how they're transforming. And this is, at least in the industrial segment, I'd say this still has a lot of room to grow. But asset light is a trend that is becoming more and more prominent. When you think about a company like Schneider, one thing we want to be really good at is current interruption, right? So we want to develop the latest and greatest circuit breaker. That's where we want to put our money. We don't want to put our money so much in a new surface mount electronic line or injection molding machines, non-core activities. We're looking to focus on the core, go asset light with production, and make your investments in your core technologies. So I think a lot's changed. I think some of it has evolved as anticipated. Some went much faster, and other aspects have proceeded much slower. But I think the trend and all of the aspects I talked about with respect to procurement's role are still very valid in my view.
And if you were to make expert guess, let's call it like that, because ultimately nobody can predict the future, but what would you say that in the next 3 years will be the evolution of procurement? Any big pointers and areas where you see it evolving, and how exactly do you see the next 3 years panning out?
Yeah, great question. First thing that comes to mind is digitization. Yeah. Kind of on one hand enabling what we do in procurement, and on the other hand really kind of challenging what we do. And what I mean by that is, digitization absolutely has a super important role in enabling kind of the traditional procurement processes from source to contract and from procure to pay, right? So having our buyers and our supply chain managers spending less time in front of computers and more time in front of suppliers and in front of internal stakeholders by simplifying and digitizing the processes, the transactional processes of their daily jobs. And on the other hand, you have advanced analytics and artificial intelligence sitting on top of these giant data lakes that we're able to collect nowadays, really challenging what we're doing. And asking questions and getting insights that we hadn't considered in the past. Just one specific example from my recent past. We're in an environment in Schneider Electric, and many of our competitors are in a similar environment where there's many different ERP systems in companies. So anytime we make a global contract and we want to implement those terms in the system, lots of transactions have to be done manually all over the world in dozens and dozens of different systems in order to apply those terms. In a recent role that I had, we did an analysis. Someone asked the question, a very senior leader in the company challenged us and said, hey, I think you probably have leakage on your payment terms. You're negotiating all these extended terms, but I'm not seeing it in the DPO. What's going on? We ended up finding through some big data analytics, hundreds of millions in cash that was leaking because we weren't current on our payment terms in all the different systems. So it just goes to show that if you ask the right questions of your data and you apply these advanced analytics tools to answer those questions, you can unlock value that you didn't know existed before. So digitization is absolutely something that's on the forefront in the next few years. I would say simplification is up there as well. I think many supply chains have far too many suppliers, far too many connections from suppliers to factories, and a simplification of that network can also unlock a lot of value. So we spend less time on transactional topics and much more time on strategic supplier relationship development. So simplification plays a role. I talked about partnership. That's definitely something that will differentiate the winning procurement teams in the future, those that can really truly collaborate with their suppliers, creating joint competitive advantages, and really taking advantage of the value that suppliers can bring to our own company's product offering is an important differentiator in the future. And last but not least, I bring the point again of agility. Building an agile and robust supply network, one that's resilient, having teams that are agile and dealing with big changes in the external environment. I mentioned the semiconductor crisis that we had recently. You could also point to the ongoing trade war, which has tempered a bit in the recent past, but is still a real issue and a real risk. Those teams that are most agile in reacting to those kind of situations are the ones that are going to win.
Yeah. That's a fact for sure. Related to the C-level, the CEO, and the role of procurement in the overall organization, because sometimes it's a bit of a, depending on the organization, sometimes it's a bit of a fuzzy line. How important is procurement? How strategic is procurement? I think everybody is trying from the procurement function to position procurement as a business partner. How do you see this? How do you see the CEO seeing procurement in this equation of adding it to the success of the company? And how is the procurement agenda in itself linked to the overall company in general?
Yeah, so, it feels like I've been fighting my whole career for the relevance of procurement with the C-level. But I've seen, especially in the last, say, 5 years or so, a big shift in the understanding and the appreciation, really, of the value that procurement can bring to the company. In fact, when I think about Schneider Electric, I'm relatively new in the company. I came in March of this year. And one of the biggest reasons that I selected Schneider is because of the C-level commitment that the company has to the function of procurement. They see the value that we can bring in supporting the top line, supporting the bottom line of the business. So when you look at the facts, in a company like ours, 50% of the revenue is leaving the company through procurement, through external purchases. Roughly 70% of the cost of goods sold is managed by our function. So if we do that poorly, we really can damage the company. If we do that particularly well, we can create a competitive advantage. And I think the CEOs, the CFOs that recognize that and that make investments in procurement to enable us to support the financial performance of the company are the ones that are going to win, frankly. And to your point about how do we link procurement to the overall company ambition? I think one thing that some procurement leaders can improve is just in how they communicate what they do, and in what they do, and how it supports the agenda of the business. And how we position it in Schneider is, we put the customer first, right? Any smart CEO is going to do that. Whatever the customer is trying to achieve, try to figure out your role in making that happen. And for us, there's 3 things that we do to do that. First of all, we support the top line growth of the business, right? We do that through assuring good quality, through bringing external technologies into our product offering, right? Secondly, we support the bottom line of the business, and that's really core to any procurement function, driving cost reductions on a continuous basis, on a reliable basis, driving cash improvements through extended payment terms and inventory reductions. That's kind of really core to what any procurement function needs to deliver for the business. And then third, we need to do these things in a sustainable way, right? So we have a certain corporate social responsibility that we need to hold our suppliers accountable to, and we need to drive compliance of our products to certain environmental and social standards as well. So it's about supporting the top line of the business, enabling the bottom line growth, and doing those things in a sustainable manner.
And a bit more detailed tactical question. What is the current organizational design of Schneider procurement when it comes to maybe category, all of it, right? Category management, regional heads. How do you structure it in a way that optimizes it for best agility, success, performance?
Yeah, I think there's no one answer to what's the ideal organization setup. I think the one we have in Schneider is not so bad though. It is, I would say, more or less fully centralized. and it has been for about the last decade or so. That gives us a certain advantage. So everyone in the company is now kind of conditioned to expect procurement to do its job. So we're not so much fighting for a seat at the table. We're getting pull from the business to execute the buy, which is a good place to start. And how we do that, we have three main pillars of the organization. The first one being category management. So we have three main pillars to our organization setup. The first being category management. And with category management, we're driving the sourcing strategy. We are leading the relationship management of all of our strategic suppliers around the world, and we're focused on categories that are delivering the most value for the business, right? The category management is one pillar and something that I think most procurement organizations need to have in order to be effective. We have one team dedicated for offer creation or new product development sourcing. So their mission is to enable, on time, on cost product launches. And they're typically co-located with the business. So they're with, the marketing and research and development teams, assuring that we bring in the external technologies that we need to support the product development, and also that we comply to the sourcing strategies set out by the category management team in our supplier selections. And then the third pillar is the regional pillar. So we have, of course, about 200 factories all around the world. So we embed procurement folks in all of those factories, just mainly driving execution, right? So you have category management setting the strategy, new product development, assuring that long-term we're complying to those strategies and we bring in the external technologies, and the regional team executing, getting the job done on a day-to-day basis. And then one small organization that is globally transversal, driving and enablement around a few different topics, one being quality, right? Something we're trying to continuously improve. Sustainability, which is a big agenda for us in Schneider, and of course the digital transformation, which is a big change and one that requires some global transversal support.
Specifically for the sustainability agenda, which is a big topic of discussion across the board in MNCs, how are you contributing to the sustainable agenda of Schneider from a procurement perspective? Also, maybe if you can give us some examples of sustainable sourcing methods or practices that you have in the company.
Yeah, sustainability is on the top of the agenda for Schneider as a corporation. Our mission with respect to sustainability is to provide energy and automation digital solutions for efficiency and also for sustainability. So in procurement, our mission is directly in line with that. We set really high standards for our suppliers with respect to sustainability, and kind of two areas, one being corporate social responsibility and the other being product compliance. With respect to the corporate social responsibility, we're a French company, so we have to comply to the French duty of vigilance law, right, which is mainly driving compliance on social topics related to human rights and to the environment. We also drive compliance to conflict minerals. Conflict minerals is a U.S. SEC regulation. Schneider is not subject to SEC reporting, but we still feel responsible to make sure that we drive that social agenda forward. So we hold all of our suppliers accountable for compliance to the conflict minerals regulation in the U.S. And then ISO 26000 is a standard, right, that we hold all of our suppliers accountable to, and that we execute through our partner EcoVadis. So those are the main social responsibility aspects. From a product compliance standpoint, in different companies organize that in different ways. In Schneider, we've decided to lead product compliance from procurement, mainly because most of the work is in interactions with suppliers and confirming the content of the products that we're buying from them. So what I mean by product compliance are things like REACH, RoHS compliance, California's Proposition 65. There's many others that certain products need to comply to. And then maybe the last remark to make on the topic of sustainability is related to recent announcements of our chairman and CEO, Jean-Pascal Tricoire. Previously Schneider had the commitment to be net zero carbon by 2030. We've recently announced that we've moved that up to 2025. And in addition to that, we've made a commitment to have our entire supply chain net zero carbon by 2050. Now, 2050 sounds pretty far away, but we have tens of thousands of suppliers, all of which emit carbon to some degree. So it's a big challenge that's on our plate now. That's just been put in front of us to drive toward a net zero carbon supply chain in the future.
I mean, definitely good to hear, and I'm really hoping that more and more companies follow. We've seen some great announcements also. I will name them because I think that they do need to be named for all the good work that they've done as well. Unilever specifically, they've done some tremendous work also in the sustainability aspect of their supply chain. You at Schneider Electric are leading the way as well, and also, I mean, actually through your solutions, I think you can enable and you will continue to enable a lot of your clients to manage their energy consumption better. And obviously energy does translate into a more sustainable way of doing business if you do it well. So that's always great to hear, because obviously it's something that we should all care deeply about, since we only have one planet. I also want to shift a little bit the conversation to something that you mentioned. You mentioned agility. And there is definitely an innate challenge between agile and flexible type of an approach and a standard sourcing process that a lot of times needs to be put into place. How do you, and is there a way in the first place to manage this conundrum? And maybe if you can share some examples of where sourcing process is still agile whilst maybe streamlined in some other ways.
Yeah, we definitely need to be flexible and more agile with these processes. On one hand, we want our stakeholders internally to be compliant, right, and to procurement processes, so that we assure professional job is done in sourcing the products and services that support our business. But on the other hand, because our customers' behavior is becoming more diverse and more unpredictable, we have to become more agile and more streamlined in those processes. So it definitely is a well-recognized conundrum from my side. A couple of the things I'd say that we can do about that, first and foremost, is digitization, which I talked about before. If you can take those processes and make them as touchless as possible, then that's a boost, right? But that's not the entire answer, not by a long shot. I think partnering with suppliers can really simplify things. And what I mean by that is, we've had a selection of a handful of what we call strategic end game suppliers. These are the suppliers where we've made a long-term commitment to each other, right, to grow the business together. And where we're shifting substantial amounts of business from our tail suppliers into these strategic end game suppliers. And in doing so, rather than sit and negotiate every individual line item, we've agreed to shift large chunks of business kind of in market baskets, right? And not worry about haggling over each individual price. Rather, we set up some commercial rules as to how pricing will be automatically calculated. So there's things like that can really streamline. And then one other good example I would say is the negotiation process. And maybe coming back to the topic of electronic components, we in the past have spent hours and even days sitting together with suppliers with lists of hundreds or even thousands of part numbers, haggling over individual prices. And we do it because we want to drive productivity. We need to get cost reductions to the business. And we're an engineering company. We're very detail oriented, and we think that is a good way of driving value. The problem with it is it's terribly inefficient, takes a lot of time for both us and the supplier. So we've totally changed in the last few months the way that we run these negotiations. What we do instead is we invite suppliers in, usually around 20 to 30 on any given day. We have some executive speeches with them, let them know what's going on in our business. We have some workshops with them around the new digital tools that we're rolling out, for example. And then we sit with them individually and have negotiations. We limit the time to only 2 hours. Again, we don't talk about individual line item pricing. We talk about the entire package. We put all the commercial issues on the table. We resolve them in a matter of a couple of hours after, a couple of months of preparing for the meeting for sure. But the interaction itself is very streamlined. And at the end, we sign a term sheet on both sides that confirms what our agreement is, and the negotiation is done. Yeah. So I think to sort of recap, we have to do, there's certain things we're always going to have to do just from a compliance standpoint. So we have to digitize as much as possible to get rid of that transactional stuff. Partnering with suppliers and raising that level of trust between us and the suppliers is an important aspect. And then, things like this negotiation process change, we have to change the business processes themselves to make them more agile and more streamlined.
Moving to a very specific group of companies, which are actually it's not. I mean, yeah, companies. It's startups, right? So when you deal with startups, because we know for a fact that innovation, to a large extent, is driven by small companies, is driven by nimble companies, is driven by this type of startups that have been maybe around for 1-2 years on the market. How is there, and you've already given some examples, but specifically for this category of engagements, do you have certain other ways or more particular ways in which to connect to make sure that you don't miss out on this rich innovation coming through the startup environment? Because you have obviously payment terms, you have legal aspects to take care of, you have a bunch of considerations when you make a contract, and startups are quite a different ball game to deal with altogether.
Yeah, if we were just to apply our standard out-of-the-box practices with respect to like supplier audits, for example, to a startup, they would never make it through the first gate, especially an early phase startup company. So absolutely a customized approach is required. And for me, there's a handful of things that need to be done differently, and this is how we manage it in Schneider. First of all, the team that is managing those relationships is special. They need to be not necessarily dedicated to that, but they need to be have the right level of experience in managing these complex relationships, right? And there need to be less so procurement professionals and really more kind of business professionals with a real business mindset and entrepreneurial mindset, so they can communicate well, right, with the startups. Also, it helps a lot to have some real tangible expertise in the category, so they can speak intelligently to the founders, right? And they need to be agile, adept, lean in how they work, right? Can't be too rigid from a process standpoint. So you have to have kind of the right say type of people running those relationships. Second would be that the processes and the tools that you use need to be special. They need to be much leaner and more flexible, say, than the traditional tools. So I mentioned the qualification process. We have kind of a staged qualification process for startups that we follow. That is not really qualification; it's more assessment resulting in an improvement action plan that we agree with the founders, right? We also check much more closely with startups on the strategic fit. So we don't assess their business processes because usually they don't have many. We assess instead their business plan, right, where they're taking their company, just to make sure that it's well aligned with how we see that technology and that relationship developing. Mm-hmm. Third, I would say is the connection with stakeholders internally. We can have a marketing manager who's super excited about developing a relationship with a startup. We need to connect with that person very early in the process, make sure they are following our processes. While the processes are streamlined, we still need to follow professional procurement process to make sure that we bring the relationship up in the right way. A continuous risk assessment is also something that needs to be done together with that stakeholder to make sure that we create something together with the startup that in the end is viable. And then I would say just the last point would be coaching and development. It's a different kind of thing. We're with a more mature company, you just set an expectation, point out the gaps, and let them do the work. With a startup, you really have to help them along. really have to help them through that development plan, bring them the resources they need to close the gaps, really help them hands-on with their business model as the relationship goes forward, and help develop it into something that that can really bring value to Schneider. So it's definitely an area where I see opportunity to support, coming back to one of your earlier questions about how do you see us aligning to the goals of the business. You know, our collaboration with startups and our work in procurement in developing those relationships is a very big enabler to the revenue, the top line growth of the business.
And since you're on this point, I need to ask you the million-dollar question. How do you measure? What are the metrics that you use to measure success of procurement in Schneider Electric? And I think we have that saying across procurement, how to measure value beyond savings, because in a lot of organizations, unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know what to call it, and procurement is saying, okay, can you cut costs? Can you cut costs? And this is the only, or the primary measure of success. But we both know that there's not really a partnership, and it's not really a long-term necessarily view. So what's your metrics for knowing that procurement in Schneider Electric is successful?
Yeah, well, we love KPIs, so we've got a lot of them. Some are quite traditional, and we'll always have those traditional KPIs, by the way. And some are a little bit more progressive. So maybe I'll talk about the traditional ones first. You know, first and foremost, it's cost reduction or savings, or what we in Schneider call productivity. You know, year over year, getting costs out of the external buy is always going to be the center stage of procurement, in my view. We talk about all these interesting, sexy things about growing the top line of the business, sustainability, and all of that, which are absolutely the future and are absolutely more and more relevant in procurement. But if you're not getting the cost reduction, then it's hard to engage in all those other discussions with the business. So productivity, I see that as the thing that keeps the lights on, if you will, for procurement, something we always have to deliver. Similar with cash, so driving cash improvement in terms of average payment terms, in terms of purchase material inventory, driving improvements there, real improvements is a relevant KPI. And then of course you have the operational performance metrics like quality, on-time delivery, lead time of your suppliers. And then maybe the last of the real traditional things would be just compliance, right? So compliance to our quality audits, compliance to all the sustainability requirements that we talked about earlier, relatively black and white things, right? I would say looking a little bit more on the leading edge of what I see as the KPIs that are really going to help us drive the transformation we're trying to drive. First and foremost, you know, complexity. We have a very complex supply base, mostly because of just the heritage of our company. It's a collection of dozens of individual companies that have come together over the course of the last few decades, right? So we have a very highly fragmented spend, a lot of suppliers. So we measure, of course, the number of suppliers. We also measure how many connections do we have from supplier to factory, right? And we have specific targets around reducing those things. And what we're seeing is as we reduce the number of suppliers, as we reduce the complexity, we free up resources and free up energy in our organization. So for example, we went from a couple of hundred packaging suppliers in Europe, continental Europe, a couple of years ago, to today we have one, just one. We used to have 8 people in procurement managing packaging. Now we have one. Right, and one is probably too many even, right? Because it's tremendously simple having just one supplier. So complexity measures are I think very relevant, at least for our business, and hopefully for many others. You asked me about startups. You know, we're measuring how many innovations are coming in to the business from startups and from mature companies. What's the resulting business impact in terms of revenue, in terms of bottom line from those innovations? That's something that we follow. We're following stakeholder satisfaction. You know, while on one hand we want to drive compliance to our processes internally, on the other hand we want to make sure that our internal stakeholders have a good experience So they keep coming back to us instead of trying to get around us, right? We also measure the engagement levels of our people, of our teams. That's super important. We want to have an engaged workforce. So we have an annual survey that Schneider runs on a global basis, that we in procurement slice and dice our segment of that to really understand, where people are engaged, where they're not, why, and create action plans around that. And maybe just one other KPI to mention. I said we have a lot. I wasn't kidding.
Yeah, you definitely weren't kidding. Yeah.
We started measuring, well, I think it was last year, the amount of revenue that we're generating from suppliers. So this is not a procurement KPI, it's definitely a sales KPI, right? But as you mentioned, we have products and solutions that can really help just about any kind of manufacturing company in terms of driving energy efficiency and sustainability improvements that have a real bottom line impact on their business. So what we've been doing in procurement is opening doors for our sales teams to our, mainly focused on our more strategic suppliers, to bring in the EcoStruxure suite of solutions to help them drive efficiencies in their business, which, by the way, when it works well, we end up benefiting from, because our suppliers are becoming more efficient and they can offer us more cost reduction, right? So it's something that I think is unique. And honestly, as a procurement professional, the last thing you want to do is complicate the relationship of your supplier with cross-trading topics. So it's not about that, really. We really kind of are doing this strictly on a basis of helping our suppliers become more efficient. Sometimes they go for it, sometimes they don't. We don't hold them accountable either way. We just open the door, and we've seen a tremendous amount of growth, because especially the most strategic suppliers are always going to listen to the sales pitch, right? And if they buy into it, then great. If not, then we haven't lost anything. Yeah. So one thing that I think is innovative in terms of the KPIs that we measure.
Yeah, I've never heard about this actually. Well, so far I've not really heard of this. So that requires quite a different. Obviously, in procurement, typically there's one type of skill set, but this almost is, it's not almost. It is a sales. It's a sales pitch. So very interesting approach. And ultimately, as you said it, if your suppliers find it useful, why not? If you don't ask, you don't get. So very interesting.
And Roddy, let me, if I could just clarify on that a bit as well. So we're not selling anything, right, in procurement. But for example, we had our recently in Barcelona just a few weeks back, our Global Supplier Day, where we invited 120 or so of our most strategic partners, say, for a day of exchanges on the usual topics, right? And on the second day, one of the things that we offered to suppliers optionally is come have some what we call B2B workshops, business to business workshops, where we had our sales team basically pitching our solutions to our suppliers. And that was tremendously successful. So that's not a job that procurement did, right? We just invited the sales guy in to make this pitch. And again, we just opened the door, right? It doesn't require a heck of a lot of effort from procurement, and it brings tons of value to the business when you do such a thing.
Got it. Now it's clear. Yeah, well, it's a good initiative and good way to put things. And again, it's a good way to position procurement as a partner to the business,
Exactly.
and as an equal to the business. So that's also very good. Kind of moving to the final bit of our discussion, and maybe lastly, but not at all lastly, if I can say that, about talent and about people and about the type of skills that we need in procurement for the future. Where do you see it going? Specifically, let's touch upon a sensitive topic, right? So we talked about data lakes, we talked about automation, AI, artificial intelligence is thrown about at every conference, I think, way too many times. But there is a reality that machine learning, that automation, that's going to be a lot of things that will be streamlined and automated in procurement. So where do you see the skills that procurement professionals will need in the future increasingly to stay relevant in the first place?
Yeah, in Schneider, we want to position ourselves to be the most attractive employer for procurement in our industry, right? So hopefully some of the things that I've described supports that. But one thing that is going to make us different from all the rest is definitely the people, because we can have all the best processes and all the best tools and technology, digitization in the world, but all of that can be copied. For me, the one thing that can't be copied is the capabilities, the energy, and the engagement of the teams, and the quality of the people. So it's absolutely at center stage for me in terms of enabling all the things that we've talked about today. And I think you've strongly hinted to some of the things that I see as gaps in Schneider and probably in many other companies as well. And that's digital acumen for sure. Myself included in this, right? Really understanding the art of the possible with respect to digitization, what it means for daily work. This is a skill that is absolutely something that needs to be amped up, I think, in many procurement organizations. Another thing that I would highlight is business acumen. Again, many of the things that we talked about require us going well beyond, say, the traditional competencies that we have in procurement, right? Yes, we have to be good at negotiation for sure, right? We have to be good at contract management. We have to be good at these kind of traditional procurement processes, but really to take it to the next level, we have to be business people. We have to understand, what is it about our business model that creates value for shareholders, and what are all the things that procurement could be doing to enable that, right? And we're a function that works very cross-functionally. We're every day sitting with R&D, with finance, with manufacturing, with quality, etc. So to really understand how the whole network of business operates, and kind of being the one that fills the gap in between functions is key. So we need people that are open-minded and willing to step in and fill those gaps. And I can give you an example from my past. Way back when I was my first CPO gig was in Thomas & Betts in the US. This is like 10, 12 years ago. And one of the gaps we had was between purchase price on raw materials and the selling price of finished goods. In procurement, we absolutely had the responsibility to buy as well as we could. And in sales, they absolutely had the responsibility to execute price increases. But what got lost in between is the translation of inflation in raw materials into individual product pricing. So we took the lead in procurement. We developed tools and systems to make those calculations. So if aluminum, copper, and steel went up by X, Y, and Z%, what did it mean for a particular product that had different levels of content of all those materials? So we served on a silver platter to the sales team exactly the price realization they had to get in the market to cover that inflation. And I don't think, traditionally in procurement, you wouldn't do such a thing. You would just, buy as well as you can, right? So to have people that are willing to step one step beyond at least kind of the boundaries of the traditional procurement function and be brave to step into that world is important and is, I think, something that can really differentiate a procurement team.
And I wanted to ask you, and actually we got together through the Procurement Congress event that you will be attending soon, and the important topic that you mentioned is also about developing talent, right? So it's attracting talent is one, that's your employer brand, that's your image in the outside. But then once you get them in, there's obviously a plan to develop and retain your top procurement leaders. What are you doing at Schneider Electric on these two topics, developing and retaining talents? And in actual fact, a lot of the times retaining comes because of developing, isn't it? So tell me a little bit about this.
Yeah, great point. I think, fundamentally the organization setup of supply chain in Schneider is a big supporter of this. Now, org design doesn't solve everything, but I mentioned procurement is fully centralized, and we're actually part of a broader global supply chain organization that is also really centralized, right? My boss is the Chief Supply Chain Officer, and basically every factory in the company is reporting into him. So with that, we have, the procurement, logistics, planning, all the main supply side functions together with manufacturing in one large organization. And with that, you have massive career development opportunities. It's much easier for us in Schneider to share talents and to give the best talent the best opportunity at the best time, as compared to a company that is more segmented and fragmented by business or by geography. So we have this environment that is well suited for developing talents. And I think we have a good purpose, right? This is a meaningful place to work, right? Schneider, the world is becoming more and more electrified. Schneider is delivering to the market, digitized solutions that result in very tangible and substantial improvements in energy efficiency. So it's being part of something that is meaningful to me is very fundamental to the engagement of employees, and it's a very personal topic for me as well. It's one of the main reasons that I came into this company. So having that meaningfulness, having the opportunities to move around into more interesting roles, and we have a leadership team that is very willing to take chances on young talent with high potential, and we do that on a quite regular basis.
Final question from me. In terms of all the younger professionals in procurement listening to this podcast now, aiming one day to become a Chief Procurement Officer, and as well as listeners in general, what was the best career advice you ever received that helped you most in your progress so far to CPO?
That's a great question. There's actually two things I think maybe I'll mention. First and foremost is advice that I took from my wife a long time ago. And in case she listens to this, I must say that it's the best advice I've received. I was working for Rockwell for the first 7 years of my career, and it was a very safe company, interesting place to work. I had many different roles, right? I was always challenged, always engaged, but I was getting a little bit bored, and I found an opportunity at a company called Danaher, which probably everyone knows now because Larry Culp is the former CEO of Danaher, now the CEO over at GE, right? Well, I had an opportunity to jump to Danaher at a time when no one had heard of this company. I think Larry Culp was just 1 or 2 years into his 10-year tenure as CEO. So it was a big risk. I perceived it as a big risk. It was a relatively small company at the time, a few billion in revenue. It was my wife actually that convinced me. She's like, "What do you have to lose? If it doesn't work out, just figure something out, right?" So take chances is the message here, because I made that jump, and Danaher is a company still today where if you have energy and potential, that they'll just continue to pile on more and more challenging work. I was only there 3 years, but it was I probably received 10 years of experience in that period of time because of the environment that I was in. So take a chance when you have an opportunity. Go for it, and if it doesn't work out, then something else will. The other thing that I'll mention with respect to career advice is a former boss and mentor of mine. When I was having my first development discussion with him, he asked me what my ambition was, and I indicated, well, I'd love to have your job. He was the CPO at the time over at ABB, and he said, well, you can't do that unless you get your MBA, get your advanced degree. And at this point, I was already 40 years old. I thought I was too old for that. But he convinced me to look around. I found a program that I really liked. And I went for it. And that was one of the best decisions I've made professionally. I went to an executive program for about 1.5 years. It was a very challenging 1.5 years. But from that, I've developed a whole new level of leadership skills. I've developed also, lifelong professional contacts and friendships, frankly, that are totally invaluable. And also I've realized kind of a new thirst for learning, right? I read books now regularly, which is not something I was doing prior to doing the MBA. So take chances and never stop learning are my two biggest pieces of advice.
Mm-hmm. Or if I can rephrase, marry wisely. And
I got lucky in that.
But that's great. That's great pieces of sharing. And I'm also convinced. I'm fundamentally family and our wives play a very, very important part in our development. And as well, lifelong learning is so crucial, especially in today's environment. But anyways, and everything changes drastically and rapidly. Dan, thanks a lot for all the sharing, for all the case studies, for all the good examples. It was a pleasure to have you with us today, and all the best in the future endeavors at Schneider Electric.
Thank you very much, Radu. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also, subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives in supply chain or transform your business, of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help.